Thank you for attending our webcast titled Leveraging the CMDB to Enable Remote Workers. So let's get started. Today we have two presenters, Fritz Byam and Yvette Mathews. And so I would like to get started with Fritz. Take it away, man.
Good day. Thanks, Chad. Hi, I'm Fritz Byam. I'm the CEO of ITS Partners, an elite and exclusively ServiceNow partner in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Today, I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Yvette Mathews.
Hey, Fritz.
Yvette is the Vice President of Delivery here at ITS and just an amazing leader in our organization. Always fun to have her in our kind of podcast studio here and get to interact with her live. So look, today we're going to be talking about the CMDB, something we talk about a lot, its impact on remote workers. And there's a few things that are going to come through. If you're on an ITS webcast, you're going to hear that a trustworthy CMDB is worthwhile, that it can be used to keep your remote workers productive and secure. And today we're going to talk about remote assets aren't really that much different. It's just all about visibility. And then finally, an important theme of that relationship between the end user and IT is kind of what's in the balance here. So before we jump in, Yvette, you're a technical leader at ITS. I need a little help. I've been out, COVID, we're back in now, and I got some apps that are a little bit glitchy. My machine isn't working, that the VPN, I had some trouble. So I've been having people just send some spreadsheets to my personal email account and that sort of thing. I'm guessing that's okay. And so, but I really, if we could get my machine back working, it'd make things easier for me.
Well, Fritz, I looked up your machine and I'm really not seeing any data on it. So I really don't know what you're using.
Hey, I don't think she can hear me, but it's just, my machine was working when I left. I don't know why we can't just fix it. It's just pretty typical for IT. I don't really think they know what the heck they're doing.
And end users always buying equipment, not telling me what they buy, using whatever, and then complaining when stuff doesn't work. I don't even know how to help this guy.
Yeah. So look, obviously that's a fake conversation, but what are the count? I wish we had live audience, and then we could ask, what do the calls sound like in your organization? How's that relationship between end users and IT, and how's IT perceived in your organization? So just food for thought. And I think it's kind of a theme we want to run throughout this. So look, today's format is problem, solution, benefit. Pretty straightforward, right? And the main problem we're talking about today, Yvette, is if you allow remote assets to make your CMDB less complete, less accurate, and less trustworthy, there's probably going to be a negative impact on your organization. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. So one of the main problems with an untrustworthy CMDB is an impact on cost. Now you think that's an asset conversation, but there's cost outside of just the equipment. There's cost to support. There's cost for uptime and downtime because we don't know what's in the CMDB. Business as usual can't operate in a very cohesive fashion if we don't have a good CMDB. That's a huge problem. I may not know about security incidents, vulnerability incidents.
Or if I have them and I don't have the information, I may have to spend a whole bunch of time not only making my end users upset, but making my friends in security upset when I got to go ask them, like, I don't really have any information about this problem.
Absolutely. Those are some things that just real quick and think about this. So I have my CMDB isn't very complete. Therefore, I may not know what you just called about an application that's not working. I may not even know you had that application.
Maybe I don't want you to.
That's also true. But overall, the cost of compliance is huge in ill-configured CMDB or a non-functional CMDB, because we don't have all the data, is a huge compliance risk, both from vulnerability and security and for money that you're going to spend for software remediation when you get ultimately audited.
Or the guy or gal who's got to figure it all out and has to do a bunch of manual processes. That costs money too.
Also the cost of employee satisfaction.
Yeah, that IT worker in compliance is has just as crappy a job as the person that just had to answer the help desk.
Exactly. overall, you're not creating a great experience. So the end users are unhappy. People in IT are unhappy. They can't help, which is what they want to do. And the end user's unhappy because they're not getting help because the data's not there. And for an end user, they have no idea about a CMDB. They really just want help.
Yeah. So cost. So one of the big implications is cost. And we've seen customers who do this right and transform IT, and every month they have a run book of the savings and the money that they're putting back in the organization's pocket. And more importantly, the brand that they're building for IT, for future funding, for innovation, you name it, whatever it is, it all works. And they're giving their users a great experience to boot. So cost, what besides cost is a potential impact of this thing their CMDB going south because of the remote workers?
Well, think about risk. You just took a bunch of people who normally work on-prem on your network and you sent them home with equipment. Or maybe you didn't give them any equipment and told them to find equipment to use. There's going to be a lot of different scenarios right now. What you're going to have is if you gave them equipment to use, there's now a vulnerability issue. I don't know what they're doing with it. I don't know if it's being patched if I don't have that data in the CMDB. Now I have a vulnerability that could negatively impact the organization, maybe when they come back.
Yeah, and vulnerability response or management is difficult even under the best of circumstances, right?
With the right tools, it's still hard. I mean, it's not an easy, security's never easy, but we can help by providing good data that we can compile in the CMDB to help augment the security tools that the security team's already using. Wouldn't that be great? Additionally, encryption management. How do I know if they're encrypted or not? Hopefully they were encrypted before they left, but if I don't have a tool going out and checking, maybe they didn't, or maybe they went out and bought that proverbial machine from Best Buy because they didn't have something to work with. They're using it for company work, but it's not encrypted. I don't know.
That's a risk.
That's a huge risk. Maybe their endpoint protection isn't working. Maybe the agent stopped working.
Oh, so let me just go off script and ask a question about that. So I have my laptop at home. This is hypothetical, of course, and I've been there for 3 months, and my endpoint expired because it didn't get updated. I'm sure that was the Symantec the published software publisher's fault, not mine. So I bring that machine and hook it back into the network at work. I'm guessing there's still no risk because the network will just take care of any malware problems.
Sure, we'd like to think that happens, but why do you think we don't just allow anyone to plug into our network? We have expectations around the security of our machines. They're getting patched, they're getting updated, antivirus is working, endpoint protection is working. If it's not, and you plug it in, now you're running the risk of infecting, just like opening an email attachment that you were told not to open.
Yeah, that's not good.
We don't want to do that. So that malware risk is huge. Maybe I'm using Wi-Fi on my device. Maybe I've decided, since we can all kind of be a little more free with where we're going, I'm going to go work from the coffee shop today because I'd like a change of scenery. I'm going to use the public Wi-Fi.
Yeah, VPN's it's hard.
Yeah, if the VPN's not working, what have I just done? I've just exposed my company's data.
Wish I'd have known about that one sooner.
Again, I should know that information. I should know if there is a VPN. I should know if I've provided a VPN to an end user. That's data I can once again capture in my CMDB. Additionally, lost or stolen machines. Look at that. I need to know if they're lost or stolen.
Well, yeah, because if someone hasn't been in the office for 3 months, how do you know?
Exactly. So are they not reporting in because the agent's broken? Are they not reporting in because they're not using them? Or are they missing? Because and if I didn't know if it was encrypted, we have a problem.
Yeah. So these things were definitely problems or issues they could be before we went more remote, right? And they seem like they're even bigger now. And it seems from what I've understood about this problem, like there's a direct correlation, and I don't know that we have the data that could support this, but we certainly got the anecdotal data, and I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this, but there's a direct correlation between visibility or availability to the organization's discovery tools and the trustworthiness of CMDB data. Do you buy into that hypothesis?
Absolutely. Think about it this way. If you're on-prem and I have discovery running, an endpoint tool that's reporting back, it's really easy for me to know what IP ranges my network uses for my company. You just took your data home. If the only way I was getting data was scanning it with the discovery tool, I hope I picked another tool to scan your device or have it call back home to us. But you know what? I may not have. Now I don't have any visibility into that device, and that's extremely problematic.
So that's just a fact of what it is. Remote devices, they're less connected. They're not just sitting. So what other things might impede visibility or availability?
Okay, so let's talk about software. If, say, I have an endpoint management tool like SCCM, and I can see what you're using on your machine, I can see what's installed. Well, maybe we went to a cloud environment, and now I got Office 365. Maybe I don't have to use it through the client. I can use it through a web browser. And maybe now that I'm home, I want to use my desktop computer that the company doesn't own. Nothing's going to stop me from doing that at all. So now I don't know what you're doing, and I don't know what devices you're using, and I don't know where our company data is sitting.
Right. And I think we've seen some examples of customers who they kind of got the whole on-prem endpoint management program dialed right in. But for whatever reason, the use case around remote workers isn't quite as solid. What have you seen there?
What I've seen, and there's lots of things, mostly it's that they haven't really thought of a good way to capture the data from a remote worker. For example, I might have given devices to somebody who works out in the oil fields, and they're using that device primarily as essentially a library so they can see schematics and things. Maybe it doesn't need to connect to the internet or call back home very often. So maybe I haven't even given them a VPN, but I do need to know that that machine is still out there and live. There are tools to find that machine. Like I might use Intune specifically for Microsoft for that reason, so that it can phone home whenever it hits network and tell me, yes, this machine is still active, and that's data I could put in my CMDB. If I haven't thought about that kind of use case for how I'm using those remote devices, maybe I don't have a solution in place. So maybe I handed a machine to a user. Yeah, they're using it because they need it for their job, but I have no control over what's happening with that. I don't know if it's getting patched or anything.
Yeah. And we've seen some organizations that saw remote as the second phase, or they kind of kicked the can down the road because there was such a strong use case around the primary one.
Yeah. Remember, remote wasn't what people focused on. Until we got all these great tools that we have today, remote workers were that onesie, twosie part of the organization. They were the sales guys who worked out of their home office, not more than half of the organization who they discovered can be just as effective not sitting in their offices and getting their work done.
Right. So, and I'm assuming that kind of jab you made about Best Buy machine is a factor in this too, and that IT maybe doesn't control all those devices.
Well, if I don't have, remember we talked about asset last time and having policies around how we purchase assets. If I didn't control that, now I don't control the CIs that people are using, because they went out and they bought a machine because they needed one. Theirs broke, and we didn't have a good way to help them get a new one. We didn't have our support desk set up to support all these remote users. We didn't have processes in place. Therefore, it was a secondary consideration because, that one sales guy, we'll ship him one. Well, now there's 300 people who need something. That's a little different than supporting that one guy who works out of his home office.
Right. So again, in this format, it's difficult to ask our listeners questions, but one I would ask is, if you support an organization that has a large number of remote users, how many machines have been invisible to you for, say, 45 days or 60 days or 90 days? I mean, that's the primary question. And it'd also be really interesting to know, like, how does that compare to a baseline of what it was before you went more remote? So again, a question I think organizations should be asking themselves. And if that number is a big number or has increased a lot, then I think that's indicative that you're probably feeling the effects of the impact of this issue. So that's important. It's good to know, like knowing where you stand is important, but then making some progress on the problem is also pretty important. So let's talk about that a little bit. So I know there's strategic things and programmatic things we can do long-term. We're going to talk about that, but is there any tactical issues that people are facing right now?
Let's talk about the first thing that you need to focus on is figuring out what you don't know. Figure out what you can scan. Compare that information with the data you gathered in your asset process. So remember, we talked about having an asset process to know what I bought. Now I want to compare what I bought with what's actually showing up in the CMDB and being regularly scanned, whether they're remote or they're on-prem. And remember, most people are probably fairly remote right now. Hopefully that data has been updated. We've all been home for months. If we're seeing a significant amount of the CMDB that's showing data that hasn't been updated for 2 or 3 months, we have a problem with our tools that we're using or how people are accessing our data. Maybe their VPN doesn't work, et cetera. We have to diagnose the level of the problem before we can figure out what the solution is. Whether our VPN's not working or it's too cumbersome for people to use, or our endpoint management tool stopped working, we don't have call phone home capability, we don't have an agentless discovery tool finding these. Could be any of those, but scanning and comparing the data we know, which is our asset data, to the data in the CMDB is step number 1 to see how big our problem is.
So that does sound like that's a relatively manual type of program that you're talking about to kind of like establish, hey, where are we? That's tactical, right? So beyond that, what are things we should be looking at and kind of in a more programmatic way or a bigger picture way to solve this in a sustainable way?
So it's not sustainable to do that manual effort over and over. So I'm going to harp again on my favorite topic, which is policies and processes. CMDB has to be managed the same way you manage your assets. If I'm not focusing on policies around use, VPN usage, device usage, maybe a BYOD policy, how I support things, all of those policies will help us maintain the data in the CMDB. If I don't have them, I have no control. I have people doing things because they're the right thing they think they should be doing, or maybe doing nothing because doing nothing is a lot easier. The data will never be good in the CMDB. Therefore, I'll never be able to provide that good user experience for both our internal IT department and for our end users when they call in and they need help. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Secondly,
yeah, it's a little, I'm sorry, that's a little counterintuitive, right? Like that policies and procedures help that relationship between the end user and IT. But it's just like any relationship. If there isn't clarity, alignment, and expectations, how can you ever have a mutually beneficial relationship, right? You can't do it.
It's not one-sided. Nothing we do here is one-sided, especially in IT. We're always about that end user and how we make things better for them. So aside from policies, remember, if we get policies, that's great. If I don't know how to execute on that policy, I don't have a process in place, that's just as bad. So even if I have a policy on how the VPN, everyone needs to use the VPN to access our company data, I have to have a process to teach them how to do it. And they have to be educated. Educating end users on your policies and your internal IT folks on them. And then the processes to support them are how you're going to get good data, because it will be repeatable. There'll be a specific way to do it every time.
And it'll be more proactive as well, which is what I like.
It's the thing that I think most organizations miss is we're talking about now users who don't sit in the office, and I can't just walk up to your desk and say, hey, Fritz, I need you to do this with your machine. If I had a process, you'd know you needed to do that. And then the data in the CMDB, when you call for help, will be much better.
Yeah, and especially, it's especially important. And it's not surprising that some organizations are kind of behind on this, because the world has changed, right? Remote is more important. That use case is arguably more important than the on-premise use case for some organizations right now. So I get that, and I hear you on procedure or policies and procedures. Let's get them in the right order, right? So what else?
Another thing that you can do right away, and you can start this today in your CMDB, is reporting. Figure out what metrics are critical to addressing the issues you're currently seeing. So
yeah, because the CMDB is just a data set. It just sits there.
It's just going to sit there. That doesn't do anything. So we have to figure out how we want to use that data. So some things I would recommend people doing today are going to be looking at data around machines that maybe haven't phoned home or records that haven't been updated in 30 to 45 days. And your organization knows which is more critical for you. But that would be the very first thing I would look at. what percentage of my machines in the CMDB aren't being updated? I'll then need to go and diagnose why, but I'll have a good idea. And if you didn't do a baseline before, this is your new baseline. You may not like the numbers, but they're the numbers that you have.
Yeah, I think, even in my relatively non-technical role, it really makes sense. Like, we got to double down on the reporting about what's checking in, what's working. And then we probably got to drive some policy to resolve those laggards, right?
Exactly. Other things that I'm going to suggest for reporting purposes, if you didn't already, remember we talked about this last time, is to see the last logged in user and add that to our CI record so I can see who's using the devices. That's something I should be able to get from one of my endpoint management tools or even my security tools.
So again, just asking kind of an ad hoc question, is there in the CMDB, are machines that are on premises, is there a field that like denotes them as on premise and ones that denotes them as potentially a remote device? Or how are most companies, is there something we could like filter on a report? How does that work?
Well, we got a couple of options. Out of the box, I could change the location for the device. Now remember, location in ServiceNow, based on the CMDB on how it works out of the box, is going to identify the location of the device as the location of the user. So if the user's location isn't updated to being remote, it won't automatically show me as that device being remote. Now I got a couple of options. What we recommend to customers is if they're going to have a disparity between where the user sits and where the device should be, you can create a secondary field called physical location, use the same location table. And when you deploy a device, you would identify where that device should be. Additionally, for people who are working remote, maybe this isn't a permanent change. It's that, they may be back in a few months. I may create a secondary Boolean field that just is remote field. That's going to help the support desk to figure out, are these people on-prem? Are these people remote? And it's something as easy as you could set a catalog item up to let the user check I'm remote. Now it's in the CMDB, easier for me to know, easier for me to run reports on.
Great, thanks. So we're back to, sorry, before I interrupted you, we were talking about some of the solutions to this visibility issue.
Yeah, so the last thing I'm going to suggest people do, and it's probably the most critical, is utilizing the tools that ServiceNow has built in CMDB Health. CMDB Health is something that exists in every instance. You don't have to build it. You do have to configure it, which means you need to set some parameters and understand how it works. That tool will give you great visibility in a dashboard almost to see all the problems with your CMDB. I can see things that aren't updating. I can see duplicates in my CMDB. I can see places where I have critical data fields that are not being filled out. Overall, it gives me a health picture. So if you don't have it set up, it's something I'm going to suggest you set up today. Use today as your snapshot baseline, and that will help you get better. Overall, it will identify areas where maybe you missed because I went remote and maybe I didn't update fields, stuff isn't being updated. I'll have a better picture of that than I would if I didn't have this tool that's already built in your system. Why not use it?
Yeah, and the fact that it combines on-premise and remote asset, that's fine, right? What's important is the overall health, completeness, and trustworthiness of that data. So great, some great suggestions. Some other things that I've heard customers talking about is keeping those remote tools healthy, so users will use them. Making sure the VPN is going to work, right? So I don't get frustrated and do that old just send me it to my personal email workaround.
Yeah, I hear that one a bit. VPNs are really critical for securing your company data between where your end user happens to be working today and your on-prem devices. So we really need to make sure that that VPN is recorded as something, and we need to know who we've given that VPN access to. That's all data that we can store inside of the CMDB. What if suddenly there's a virus? Oh, I can see, did they have access to the VPN? Did I not give them access to the VPN? Maybe it's my fault, not the fault of the end user. They were just working.
Yeah. So the question I would ask if I could to get, and probably I will be asking to customers once we can actually go visit again, and is, when's the last time your organization updated the reporting around endpoints in the CMDB? Do you measure the health and use of your remote tools? Are you using that health dashboard for the CMDB? Just some basic things that you can do to determine, am I being impacted more or less, have some better telemetry about the impact of remote users on your organization. So now we kind of get to the good part. benefits, right? Problem, solution, benefits. And for me, I see that there's this whole idea of the experience for both IT workers and end users. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, do you want people who are frustrated, or do you want people who see IT as helpful? Ultimately, we want to be seen as helpful. That's my goal as an IT organization, is to have the right data to help people the first time they call, and to have my employees feel like they have what they need to solve people's problems.
Yeah, so they don't hit that, they hit that, the difference between that frustration level of IT's not doing it and boy, IT's just on the ball and nailing it every time. We've seen it, right? We've just seen that's so important. That's IT transformation, and it's what ServiceNow can really literally do for organizations if they get some of these foundational IT workloads right. So really important. I'm glad you mentioned that. So there's a lot of other benefits too. And I don't want to go through them. We could talk quite a bit about the cost. Like we started with the problem definition. Business as usual gets really expensive when things don't go well, right? When you don't have data in the system. We know that security doesn't do well when we don't have good data in the system. When we walk through all those kind of use cases up front. We also know it's really tough to innovate with ServiceNow if you don't have reliability in your CMDB. There's some advanced features and functionality you can do that really give you some more telemetry, and that's not really the subject of this webinar, but I think you'd tell me it's event mapping or service mapping and
Event management.
event management, yeah, are things that if you have a strong CMDB, you can move on to those more innovative workloads.
Yeah, it's an actionable CMDB, not just a data repository.
Right. So listen, I've listened to you, and I know my CMDB is not healthy. Maybe it wasn't before I went remote, and going remote certainly didn't fix it. What do I do?
Well, I'm going to suggest that you identify your issues, and then I'm going to suggest that you don't try to go it alone. I have a lot of customers who've tried to build a CMDB once, twice, 4 times, 6 times, you name a high number, they keep getting higher. Go with someone who can help you. Find an expert like ITS who can come in and bring in best practices and can bring in years of experience of helping people build a CMDB that's functional, that addresses not only your on-prem needs, but your remote needs, that addresses the support desk, that addresses more advanced functionality like event management and service mapping. All of those things are going to lead to better support for the organization and a good premier experience for your remote workers.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned support desk. Could we have another crack at that help desk call? Yvette, I've been out for a while. I got some apps that aren't working. I got some pop-ups. I don't know what it means. I don't think it's good. Can you help me?
Well, Fritz, I'm looking in the CMDB and I see it hasn't checked in a while, and I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure you should.
Yeah, I've been remote.
I think you probably got some emails from us that.
Yeah, I saw some of those emails come through. I did see, you're right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure one of them may have addressed a policy that you were supposed to follow if you got those emails.
I don't think this is IT's fault.
Well, you know what? Regardless, we can fix it because I have some of your data. It's an easy fix now.
Yeah, and that's what we want, right? We want IT people are the smartest people in the enterprise. Let's face it. And if we give them the tools, we give them the process and the policy to show that to the rest of the organization, and it gives that great user experience. It builds confidence in our IT staff. It enables the executive level to view us differently. It makes our brand strong, so we get investment, we get to innovate. That's all the things we want. And we want those calls to go that. We want IT to be the one that, you know what, they had it nailed. IT's got remote endpoint management nailed. They know what they're doing. They didn't miss a thing. That's what builds our brand in the organization. That's what gets us excited here at ITS. So Yvette, thanks for your time today. It's always fun sitting across from the table and having a discussion and having you educate me on all things IT. Thank you.
Thanks, Fritz.